It's really a delight to be here, and I'll start the story sort of at the beginning. We moved to Lincoln City, my husband and myself, with a friend, Ken Elam, and a nurse practitioner, Meg Portwood, and had no idea that we were coming into this. But I was already a peace activist and had been very active in a number of things during the Vietnam War. And so I came with a history of activism, not intending to be an activist here. And what happened is that friends of mine from medical school came and joined our practice. Terry Gutzel was an internist. And at that time, there were protesters who were deliberately sprayed. And he ended up taking care of 10 of them. And when he decided to go back to Kentucky, he left me with those 10 patients. And they had multiple chemical sensitivities. They had all kinds of problems, skin problems, just a myriad, but no one set of symptoms fit all of them. And one of the people was Richard Armentrout. I don't know how many of you know him or not, but he was an OR tech. He worked in the operating room as a nurse who handed you the instruments when you operated. And I didn't get to know him because his multiple chemical sensitivities kept him from handing me the instruments. He wasn't able to work. And so I knew him outside, just peripherally, but he invited me to a conference. Chuck and myself, I was married and both of us were family physicians. He invited us to a conference in Portland that the man was very wise. Richard and Dick Lawrence really provided the networking capabilities that allowed us to do what we did, the organization to do what we did. And he rented the library auditorium at OHSU and publicized all over the state that he was bringing in expert herbicides who were going to talk about health effects of herbicides. And so everyone thought it was put on by OHSU because the flyer said, herbicide experts to speak at OHSU. And so I went and I listened to these people talking, and I started thinking back over the neural tube defective babies that we had delivered. We delivered an anencephalic, I delivered an anencephalic child. That's a child that has no conscious brain, they kind of look like a frog. Now, the incidence of these malformations is tiny. And then we delivered a second one. And then we delivered another child with a porencephalic cyst. That's another neural tube defect, brain defect. And by the time we finished, we had, out of 202 deliveries, had 27 major malformations. And so I stood up and started asking questions of these researchers who basically were working with lab animals. And I mentioned the fact that we had delivered these anencephalic children, and the press, just who had come to this because of all of Richard and Dick's advertising, glommed onto this. And it ended up that I ended up becoming pretty well known, much more so than I deserved or wanted at that point, because my life was pretty busy. I had postponed having children. We'd been married 14 years and just started our family.
Is there any unusual
So
incidents of anencephaly or neural tube defects in our state or in our county? And they said, oh no, none at all. And so I thought, okay, all right, well, that's interesting. But I started reading some more literature, and getting hold of literature was not easy. There wasn't a lot published in English, and one of the other pieces of the community that helped was Dr. Ruth Shearer, who was an oncologist at the University of Washington had gotten an interest in 2,4-D, and Richard got us connected. And she was at the university, and she would have these papers translated from other languages for us. And so I had access all of a sudden to a whole lot of literature that nobody else in the country had access to because it was translated for me. And I said, you know, certainly Agent Orange and possibly just 2,4-D could be responsible for this. We don't know if it is, but it's certainly something to look at. And so the next call I made was to CDC, and I spoke to Godfrey Oakley, who was the head of the Birth Defects division at CDC. And he said, oh yes, I know where you are. He said, there's a map on my wall. You're one of the 4 hotspots in the nation for anencephaly. You and Benton County. And that's when I discovered that I was not the only person delivering anencephalics here. And there was one that I think Peter Cookson delivered, and then there were 2 that I heard about that were home births, that were buried when they were, after they were born and died. They were buried, and those 2 were never reported. And whether they actually, that was hearsay. They were home births, people didn't want to talk about it. And I asked Oakley why my health department did not know about this, and CDC did. And at that time, and I'm not sure it's still in continuous, but in small counties, the hospitals, in order for them to release information to CDC, they had to get CDC to promise that they would not identify the hospitals. And they felt that in a county this small with 3 hospitals, it would be, did you get it working? Oh, good. That it would be impossible to release that data without people knowing which hospitals it came from. And so.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyway, so he said, if you tell people about this, he said, I will not confirm that I gave you this information. And I said, well, that's not very helpful. I said, it is helpful to know. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. Oh dear. I create problems. Maybe I could talk with that one. Let's see.
You're fine.
Okay. All right. Anyway, then I called National Institutes of Health. Not being a person to sit back and just sort of accept what people tell me, I just kept calling. And in the meantime, I was pregnant, having a baby, doing surgery in the morning, doing the intensive care unit at North Lincoln Hospital because we had no internists at that point. That was before Jerry joined us, and Terry had already gone. So I was a very busy lady, and I just kept amassing information. And when I could, talking to people about it, and a lot of people started calling me on the phone and asking about information that I had. And now time is going to kind of spiral here because I'll go back and forth. At one point, the EPA called me and they said, we'd like you to be an expert witness for the 245T cancellation hearings. And I said, well, that's really easy. I said, you don't need me, but I'll write a letter. So I did. And 245T was canceled. And then they said, well, will you be an expert witness for the 24D cancellation hearings? And I said, well, I don't think I can say anything that actually relates what's happening here to the herbicides. I can say that we are seeing all these effects. And I can see that the 10 people who were sprayed had significant effects, but I cannot give you any kind of data. And my background, before I went into medicine, I had a degree in physics. And then when I went into medicine, I went into an MD PhD program. So I took a lot of statistics. And so I understood a lot of the research stuff. I did not finish the PhD part of my program, but it gave me the ability to look at some of these papers and understand whether they were valid or not. Because there's a lot of science that is not valid. And it either starts with an incorrect assumption, or they use the wrong type of statistics. And oh boy, can you lie with statistics. It's just amazing. But what I said is, I can say we're experiencing these things. They seem to be related temporally to the spraying. And I said, but I cannot say it's causal. And they really, in fact, the lawyer for the EPA started crying on the phone. And she said, do you realize they have over 100 lawyers, and there is me and one assistant? She said, I need you there so I can get you on the stand to say something that's completely outrageous, and then I can get you on the stand and you can answer all these questions. She said, because they're not gonna want you on the stand. And I said, well, I can't do that, because if I do that, my credibility is shot. You know, once I say something that is not defensible, my credibility is shot, and they're gonna get up there and they're just gonna go back to that one thing constantly. And so I wrote a fairly long paper talking about what we had seen as far as birth defects, the bleeding that people were experiencing with the spraying, and the chemical sensitivities, and some of the other things that people were experiencing, and how those related temporally to the spraying. And they stipulated to everything I said. They did not want me on the stand, so I never went there to testify. As things progressed, because I had done the research and I had these papers, other physicians continued to call me, and that was why they identified me as an expert. I said, I'm not an expert, I'm a family physician on the coast of Oregon. I'm not some worldwide expert. But it turns out that actually I was the person that people called from all over the country when they had questions about the herbicides. So by their definition, that made me an expert. I started doing some education around herbicides for medical societies. And that again was all organized by the community activists. They were wonderful. They would get hold of a doctor in an area who had a question, and they would say, well, look, would you like Dr. Stringham to come down and talk to your medical society? And so I went to California a couple times and to other areas, but also started doing more public speaking, all again arranged by the community activists. I did not arrange any of this. And then Andy Zedwick, who was our county commissioner at that time, was wonderful as far as providing some political knowledge and background for us to get this initiative petition on the ballot. And we worked very hard to word that initiative petition so that it restricted herbicide spraying. I think it was you could not spray within 100 yards of any running stream in Oregon. You could not spray within 100 yards of a school playground. You couldn't spray within bus stops. It was very carefully worded so that there were still areas they could spray, but they couldn't spray where they would contaminate our water. They were broadcast spraying over the surface water that we all drank. And they had no restrictions around this. So even the farmers who were in my practice from Tillamook would come down and they would ask, the county extension agents tell us that we can spray and we can put the cattle back on that field the next day. And I said, that's not what the label says. I said, you look at the label and even Monsanto tells you, you can't put those cows back on the pasture for, I think it was 10 days. And they said, well, we can't afford that. We don't have, a pasture for 10 days for our cows. And they said, do you think it's really a problem? And I said, yes, because 2,4-D is concentrated in the fat. And the fat, the cows eat the grass, it goes into their system, gets concentrated in the fat in the milk, comes out, the kids drink the milk. And kids are much more sensitive to most of these chemicals than we are. And I'm sorry, I'm sort of wandering around and just telling the story, but as we worked on the initiative petition, and I was telling my friends today what it was like, there were people sleeping in my house, and we were working day and night. I would go to work in the morning, and these people would still be in my house. They were like living in my house, working on the herbicide initiative petition. And we worked that so carefully that we thought for sure it would pass. We knocked on every door in North Lincoln County at least once. And anyone who had questions that the person knocking on the door couldn't answer, they noted that, they sent someone else back to answer the questions. The initiative petition failed 50.5 to 49%, something like that. But the opposition we ran into was very well funded. The statewide initiative petition did not get on the ballot, and they had raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight that petition. All of that was poured into Lincoln County. Pages 3, 5, and 7 of the News Guard were full-page pictures of people standing outside the mill with the door saying closed, or the parents with a little kid saying we don't have any food. I mean, this was just amazing. You open that newspaper and there it was right in front of you, every other page. And anytime we would speak, and I'm sorry, we were doctors in the days when doctors were not business people, we were professionals. And we didn't know if we passed out papers, we had to, we credited where the paper came from, all that sort of stuff, but we didn't put down copied by us personally. And so they turned us in for election fraud, which of course we weren't guilty of. And they came after us in every way. Pretty soon, people elsewhere, and you'll see these articles in the Los Angeles Times. There was a little tiny article that I don't have a copy of, but my sister-in-law saw on the front page of the New York Times, the bottom right-hand corner, Sports Illustrated did a big section about the herbicide controversy in Oregon. And now people were upset. Monsanto was upset, Georgia Pacific was upset, Publishers was upset. This was big, it's getting national news. And I stopped doing all of this because on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, while Chuck was making rounds at the hospital, I was home with Lars. And Lars was getting big, and Leaf was still in a bassinet or whatever. He was like 3 or 4 months old, something like that. These two fellas in suits came to my door and asked if they could come in and talk about herbicides. And they identified themselves by name, but not by profession. And I said, yes, yeah, you can come in, sure. I'll make you a cup of coffee. We can sit and talk about herbicides. Well, half an hour into the conversation, sorry, I still remember this with a lot of emotion. It was clear that they were on the other side of the issue, and were from the corporations. And
So I was starting, my answers were getting a little shorter, and I wasn't as anxious to have them there, and it was pretty clear. And one of them said, "Have you ever seen the movie Silkwood?" And I said, "Yes, I've seen the movie." I said, "Maybe it's time that your folks left." I said, "I have a lot to do." And they said, "Well, we just wanted to know if you always know where your children are." And I said, "It's really time for you to leave." And they said, "Well, we just, you know, they're just questions, you know. Are your kids out, you know, are they out playing in the neighborhood?" Well, Lars was 3, something like that. And so I said goodbye to them, and they left, and I thought about it all weekend, and I realized I couldn't protect my children. I had no way to protect my children. And I packed up all my 5 file boxes full of records and files and stuff, and I took them all up to Eugene to MCAT. And I said, "I'm done." And that was it. So what I'll tell you from now on is not current so much in herbicides as it is in the things that we talked about then and we're still talking about. One of those is the precautionary principle. We should not be taking tested things and testing them on human populations. And there's several reasons for this. I mean, not only is it immoral and unethical, but there are so many degrees of freedom in a human population that you can never really study it clearly. You can't isolate the one factor in a human population. So the studies really in a human population aren't very accurate. And during the controversy, I think it was CDC, had been called on to come out and do a study, do the final study. The forestry industry, everybody wanted to come out and do a study in this area. And so I went into Salem and I listened to the presentation that they gave about the study. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to the study and I'm thinking, this is not a good study. Why are they going to do this study? And so I raised my hand and I said, "Hey, what's the sensitivity of this study? If anencephaly is actually present as a birth defect at the levels that it appears to be, what is the chances that your study will show that this is related to herbicide?" And they said, "Well, you know, there are lots of things," and I kept coming back to the same question. I said, "What's the sensitivity of the study?" And they said, "If it's actually there at the rate that it looks like it's there, we have a 5% chance of finding it." And I said, "That means 95% of the time this study will be negative, even if it's there." And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Then why would you do the study?" And of course, the forestry industry is sitting there grinning in the background. This is why we'll do the study. We're going to answer this once and for all. But I don't think they ever did the study, because I said there is no support for this study in our community, you know, because it's not going to prove anything. You know, the chances are excellent that it's not going to prove anything, even if this is there. So, using the precautionary principle, you don't release things into the human population that are unstudied, that are not studied in organisms that are similar in some way to humans or in small controlled environments. The second piece of that is that many of these herbicides are sprayed not singly but in combination. A lot of the Agent Orange was 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, and sometimes another agent was in that. And then when they were spraying 2,4-D, they were also spraying Picloram. So not only have they not been studied adequately singly, but they've never been studied in combination. And I don't know how many of you remember Norma Thompson? McMillan. Norma McMillan.
But she, went to court, and I testified for her, and she won. And the judge gave her $1 in damages. She lost her farm. She lost everything. But, because, yes, she was sprayed deliberately and oversprayed deliberately, and she was in the hospital from that. There was clear evidence that this made her ill. $1. And then she lost, the lawyers didn't charge her because she didn't get any money, but all the expert witnesses that she brought in, she had to pay, and that took her farm. So it's not an easy business, and unless you have a community that works together, each of us has special pieces. My piece was the research and the public speaking and the medical society. And we did get our medical society to sponsor this, and that was a big deal. Chuck and I had gone on one of the only vacations we had ever taken. We went away for a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we came back Sunday night, and Rick Gibson and everybody was at our house already. I'm sorry, there's still some feedback from one of the microphones.
No, it's the system.
Oh, is that what it is?
Infrastructure here.
Anyway, they said, there's an emergency medical society meeting tomorrow night, and they're gonna bring up some experts to talk to us about the herbicides. And I said, what experts? Who are you bringing? Who's coming up? And it turned out that the mill, and I think the chemical industry, but at least the mill, had offered some people in the medical society the opportunity to have land and a bond. They would sponsor a bond to give us a brand new hospital on this land, halfway between Toledo and Newport. And they would provide this. There were people in our we did not need 3 hospitals in this county, We really did not, and we needed a new hospital, which we now have here at Newport. But they were offering us this if we did not sponsor that initiative petition. And it was all on the QT, but that's why they were bringing the experts up, because they were afraid that our medical society might consider this, because as we had become educated, even Bob Kay, who was a physician in Lincoln City, who was one of the flaggers on the ground for the spraying in Vietnam, he used to hold up the flags so they knew where to spray. So he was sprayed many times, and he was he said, this stuff can't be poisonous. He said, I've been sprayed so many times. And so I started giving him literature. And finally he says, wow, this is nasty stuff. I guess I was lucky. I must be one of those people who's not sensitive to it. And so this community group got together with Gibson down here in Newport, who was the videographer, rented the Christian TV channel. The satellite only had 2 channels in those days, and one of them was the Christian channel. And so he rented that the night of the medical society meeting, and we called Sam, help me with the name. Sam Epstein at I think he was Chicago Medical School, was he? I don't think he was at Northwestern. I think he was at Chicago Medical School. Yeah. Anyway, he was head of public health and environmental health there. He was also the head of the Chernobyl investigation group. Well-known, well-respected man. Incredible man. He agreed to go down at 10 o'clock at night in Chicago and go to a TV station where he was filmed and be our counterpart to these fellows. This was all done within 18 hours of finding out about the medical society meeting. And when the 2 experts from California, from the other side, arrived,
and they discovered that Samuel Epstein was going to be coming in by satellite, they said if we had known he was going to be here, we would not have come. But after the presentation, and Jerry, you were there, right? Yeah. After the presentation by these two experts and Sam Epstein, who basically countered every single one of their things, we had a telephone line open to him. We had, for the first time in our history, we had a closed ballot. And the Medical Society decided to sponsor the initiative petition. That was a big deal. And I was so proud of our medical community to be able to actually open up and listen and hear and learn. Because we're all busy. I mean, all of us are busy all the time. And I stopped practicing 3 years ago at 75. And at that time I was only doing part-time stuff and doing what we call locums tenens, going different places and working. But, you know, we're involved in our practices. It's not like we have a lot of extra time to do extra things. And even to learn, and we have to stay up to date on our own medical stuff. And to go outside that and find other stuff was amazing. I was so proud of our medical society for doing that. That was just great. But none of this could have happened without this community of about 20 people, including the videographers and Richard and Dick Lawrence, and I'm sure I'm leaving out other names, Barbara Kelly, I mean, and of course Carol Van Strom. I mean, all of these people had little pieces that were incredibly important to play. So I guess that's why I wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight, so that you understand that it takes a community to really accomplish this. And my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have passed the ban, but it's now being challenged. And it's being challenged because apparently the state can override the county thing. And so there is a citizens' rights or a community rights initiative that people are considering to allow communities to have more self-control. And the wording is going to have to be really careful. It's going to have to be done very, very well. But it's really exciting that, you know, we started this, in 76? And the ban was passed this year, finally. Okay, I know there's things I've forgotten. What are some of the things that I was supposed to talk about? I will. I was going to take questions, but you had said there were things you wanted to make sure I touched on.
Oh, do talk about sensitivity and how that happens, and why some people become sensitive.
Oh, a little bit. Thank you. We're learning a little bit more about why some people are sensitive to things and other people are not. I had cancer back in 84, 83, 84, somewhere around there. And I was radiated beyond belief. And they continued for years doing all kinds of bone scans, brain scans, everything. Turns out that I'm one of those people who is particularly resistant to radiation. I haven't had any ill effects from any of that radiation, and I've had huge doses of radiation. Okay, there are a lot of people with 1/10 of that radiation who would have had significant effects. So we all have a different genetic sensitivity to things. In addition to that, some of the stuff that's being discovered recently about epigenetics. Is people not familiar with that term? Okay, epigenetics is the study of those things which regulate whether or not a particular gene is turned on or turned off. And it seems like a lot of the chemicals in our environment work at that level where they turn on or turn off different genes.
And for some people, that's a very significant thing. And they can get exposed to very low doses. Certain genes are turned off, and by gosh, they've got rashes, they've got chemical sensitivities, they have all these symptoms. Now, I can't say those are from the herbicides. I want to be clear about that. But I can say herbicides are one of the chemicals that have been studied in this whole program. And as we're learning more and more about epigenetics, we're finding out that that actually controls a lot of our life, because if a particular gene is turned off, something doesn't happen that normally would happen. And there might be a gene that is turned on that we don't usually have turned on. And we're thinking that's how a lot of cancer promoters work, is that they turn on or off genes. And they don't affect the gene specifically, but they are epigenetic influences. And the study of epigenetics has been going on, I think I first heard about it maybe in the 90s. I was on the board of Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, and they started doing programs talking about epigenetics. But then I took a little hiatus in my Oregon life, and I went to Miami University and worked there for 3 years, from 1990 to 1993. And one of my housemates at that time was a researcher looking at agricultural runoff and its effect on fish. And he published this lovely paper showing these really nice fish, and then they were exposed to the runoff from agriculture, and that's not just pesticides, but it's fertilizer, all the different things that come off the farms, as you all who are farmers know, that a lot of chemicals are used on most farms. And he showed that these fish morphed into a totally different looking creature. Their eyes bulged, they had a different, instead of a fish-like appearance here, they were bulgy and really odd looking, and their color changed. And then he showed that if they put them in fresh, clear water over a period of a month or so, they would revert back to a healthy form. So, I said, wow, this is stuff we need to know in our medical literature, which it shouldn't just be in the agricultural literature. We should be seeing this, because we're looking at humans who are in this milieu of chemicals all the time. And it could be, and you who do homeopathy, you know that, the toxins affect people differently. And detoxifying is hard if you're in an environment where you're constantly being exposed to those, re-exposed to those chemicals. Was that more or less what?
Yeah, could you tell me about, what was the word, not cancerous, but, or carcinogen, but the P word?
Promoters.
Promoter?
Promoters?
Yeah.
Promoters are chemicals which, when given with a known carcinogen, make the dose of the carcinogen to cause cancer much smaller. So that, say it takes a pound of this particular chemical to cause cancer. And if you give the same animals a tenth of a pound of this chemical with another chemical, which is a promoter, you can get the same rate of cancer. And so, by not studying the combinations that we're spraying together, we don't know what they do. And so, the one thought I want you all to remember, say after me, precautionary principle. Precautionary principle. Okay? It's so important that we start using that whenever we talk to someone about new chemicals, new drugs, new everything. We use the precautionary principle, saying that until you prove that this is safe, it should not be released to the human population. And proving something is safe is not easy. It's a lot easier just to prove that it's not harmful in a specific way. And so asking people to prove it's safe really isn't something we can require of them, but we can say, you need to show that it does no harm. And so yeah, did that answer? Okay, now I'm gonna open it up to questions. And would the ladies like to run the mic so that people can ask the questions? And I'm asking you to keep your questions quite short.
I know a lot of the herbicide issues that we dealt with in the past were with 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T and all. But the chemical industry has since placed a lot of interest in using atrazine or using glyphosate, saying they were far safer chemicals. And so they still to this day say that the pathways that are used to kill these plants with the glyphosate are not present in human cells, and therefore humans have no risk from this. But you're aware of the bacterial biome in the body that has bacteria that is susceptible to the same pathway, and so that the human bodies can be affected by that.
That's exactly right, and there's a lot more to the bacteria that live in our body than we ever credit them for. They keep us healthy. The bacteria that normally live in our bowel break down the cholesterol we eat, okay? We don't have to get hypercholesterol if we have the right bacteria in our gut. And so a lot of these things will affect the biome, but I thought that the World Health Organization, and maybe I better check this on Google, just had a statement about glyphosate.
They did.
They did.
Yeah.
And that statement was that it was a carcinogen, right? When I did testifying in, now we're talking ancient history here. We're talking the late 70s, early 80s. I was often asked about glyphosate and Roundup, sorry. And when I testified, the experts for Monsanto also had no access to their data. They only had access to the summary conclusions done by the scientists who did the studies. But they did not have access to the data either. And they have kept that data very, very closely held. There is no way, there's no way that we're gonna break that loose, especially now that Bayer owns Monsanto.
Well, I'd like to add, I'll step in, no, I don't need the mic. I'd like to step in, I come from western Colorado, and I moved here because I needed a break from anti-fracking, which we just cleared, we just saved about, if you want. Sure. So I just came from western Colorado, and so from two sides. One is anti-fracking. I've got two brothers in the oil business. Thanksgiving is always fun. And we just saved a couple 100,000 acres, which has been a real treat for us. However, I also work in emergency rooms, and I will tell you that if we have an exposure on a frac site of any kind, a sludge pond or a frac site, we cannot get the information. We cannot. They're not allowed to give us the ingredients. They can give us recommendations for what we should do, and they're pretty blasé. Please, we're in this affected area. Anyway, so just information. It's an herbicide. It's in the land of oil and the fracking and the drilling, and it's everywhere. But they're more and more. They don't. Even if we beg them as we're an ER crew that we've got the poison control working with us, we cannot get the ingredients.
That's right. And here in Oregon, I'm not sure what it's like now, but
back in ancient history, permits had to be applied for and granted for spraying. But those permits were then filed in Salem. Prior to the spraying, they were filed. They were not filed in any order. They were simply put in boxes, and they were put in a room. If you wanted to find out what was going to be sprayed in your area, you had to go there and go through boxes, and boxes, hoping that you would find the current spray permit that identified what was going to be sprayed. And we tried and tried and tried to get that. Now that we have computers, you know, we're really ancient history back then. Now that we have computers, I would anticipate that those permits have to be filed online. And they should be much more readily accessible, but I don't know. Are they?
Yeah, for anybody who hasn't heard about FERNS, an acronym for, I can't find it in my head, but it's an electronic notification system for forest activity, and you just become a subscriber to the site, and you can choose where you want to be alerted to, and be part of the alert system. Yeah, it works better, but it's not real user-friendly.
They don't have to tell all the components that they're using though.
Right, it's just a name.
They just tell you you're being sprayed, but they're not gonna tell you when exactly. And they're gonna tell you that you have a window that you're gonna be sprayed, and they're not gonna tell you all of the proprietary ingredients in what the cocktail is that might spray you.
So they still don't have to tell you what is being sprayed, is that correct?
Sometimes what they'll do is give you a whole list of them, you know,
It'll be one of those
and
things.
then they'll use something in that list during a certain framework of time.
Okay, so there are lots of things to work on. And I got into this sort of through the back door. I mean, I got in because, one, I inherited those 10 patients who had been sprayed, but then I also delivered those anencephalic children. And Richard and the community organized so well, and that was how it happened that I became a spokesman. It wasn't my back, it was the whole community that did that. And
So like you say, we have a lot to work on, and that's why the right to local community self-government amendment is the foundation to all of this. It's not just spraying, it's not just fracking, it's not just water extraction or CAFOs, or it's all of the corporate fuckery. So we have written the right to local community self-government charter amendment that would amend our state constitution. It's languishing in court, but it is the foundation for all the ways that we the people have the right to protect ourselves from corporate intrusion and harm. And that's in your Lincoln County ban. You have that. It's one of the three legs of the stool. You have the ban. You ban aerial spraying. You have the right to enforce that ban with the right to local community self-government, and you also are protecting the rights of nature. So you have an intact, beautiful piece of legislation, and it's inspiring a lot of people through the nation, through the whole community rights movement, because it's a national movement, it's an international movement. You'll keep hearing about the state amendment, and they will fight us every inch of the way. But we do have the right to protect ourselves, and if we use that, nothing's going to dissuade us.
wow, you've got a hard road to hoe, I'll tell you. That's amazing. And in my mind, right away comes up a whole lot of libertarian ideas about, you know, states' rights, all the rights for local communities to not do things. I mean, when you do the languaging here, it's gonna have to be really careful, because I can see how a lot of communities would use this to prevent abortion, how they would use it to prevent gay marriage, how they would use it to prevent a number of things which are federal law now.
So does anybody, do you want to answer that, any of the community rights people, because there's an answer to that.
Great, that's what I want to hear.
Well, and let's kind of stay focused more on you too. I mean, right? And let's.
So we'll do 10 cents of education, yeah, because we have a wonderful supporter here. The amendment has a clause in it that says that you cannot pass any local ordinance that decreases the protection that's provided when it comes to
federal
health and
level.
safety.
Human rights and things like that.
When it comes to health and safety, and that you cannot diminish what's already there. You can only strengthen protections. So that's how it gets covered.
Okay.
Does it also cover human rights
Yeah.
and
Yes.
civil
It's a
rights?
constitutional right, and
It's
you
a
cannot
constitutional right.
lower constitutional right.
Okay, so this is, because these are questions that are very important, because it's not just the herbicides, but it's activating the herbicide ban that's already has been passed, and getting that actually to be fully legal. And so I think that's very important. Okay, more questions?
What about the inert ingredients that are not discussed?
The inert ingredients, it's hard to say. Yeah, I'm one of those people who is sensitive to one of the common inert ingredients is in eye drops and stuff. And it's not the eye drop itself, it's the inert ingredient that I seem to react to. So yeah, the inert ingredients are important. They should be specified. We should have the right to know what is coming into our bodies involuntarily. We also should have the right to know, from my perspective, what we're putting in our bodies voluntarily. So labeling should be absolute. They need to put everything down. I didn't realize that bread, organic bread, uses something called MCT, which is a binder, and it doesn't have to be listed on it. I had no idea about that until I started reading about that the other day, and I said,
I want to thank you for bringing this information forward and your involvement from the beginning. I'm fairly new to all of this. I have a tend to focus on healing and stay out of a lot of it, but it's gotten to the point where there's so much intrusion in all of our lives. My question is does anybody here know where the medical societies and communities stand in support with this measure? And are there focus groups to help educate the community besides just this one group? Is any of that happening yet?
At the present time, I do not know. Jerry, do you?
No, I mean, I haven't been to any, okay.
We probably have lots to say.
I haven't been to any of the local medical, there is no longer any county medical society. So there is no organization which binds the medical community here in Newport with that in Lincoln City anymore. Okay,
Really?
that's ancient history too.
Right.
But locally, I think the medical community, maybe it's just the people I know, are very supportive of this bill, this recent bill that passed. So I think that going forward, you can, we the
That supported us during the measure, because we really did get your support. You wrote an argument in favor, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, the people that we knew through our own friends and acquaintances did support this. And, but we need more. We need more people within the medical community, without the medical community. We just need more people because everything really travels best by word of mouth, by face-to-face discussions about this. I mean, social media is good, but I think face-to-face conversations are optimal.
I also want to just answer the other part of your question about focus groups and things like that. We'll be meeting with the Lane County people on Sunday. We are getting requests from other counties, other communities, throughout the coast on Oregon. So we're at that stage of taking both the success and struggles around community rights and being able to use that in an educational way. So we are poised to do everything that you've asked about. So I am hoping, both here in Newport and within this county and other counties, that you'll be hearing from us more and more. These events are part of that outreach, so that people may be hearing about community rights for the first time, or it might be the 10th time. It really doesn't make any difference. That's how we do it. That's why they call it grassroots. If you're a farmer, right? That you start with just a little piece of grass here and a little piece of grass here, and all of a sudden it's a big mess, and you can't get rid of it. That's us.
I love it. Would everybody who is in the medical profession or was in the medical profession retire now, just raise their hand.
How about still active?
Okay, yeah, recovering. But if every person who is in the medical community has just, organizes a little lunch or invites several of their friends who are in the medical community over, say, look, I was at this conference or this thing and I heard about this. Let me tell you what I heard or what I learned, and let's talk about it. You can start it right here. It takes that kind of activity. And you've got great organizers here. I mean, really great. They called it harassment, but I thought it was wonderful. They kept after me until I wrote a supporting, I signed the support for the petition. It wasn't that I didn't want to sign it, it's just that I was too busy. And I stay busy and active, but not in the herbicide stuff, so. More questions?
I'm trying to get a better handle on the concept of promoters. Is that what they are, promoters? I'm wondering, can they be environmental? Okay. So, for example, a fish that is facing a predator, if that fish was exposed to an herbicide, that predator could be, and it causes a nervous problem with the fish, that predator could be a promoter.
I don't understand that analogy.
Stress. Stressors.
She thinks it's no, the answer.
Yeah, it's not a.
Sorry.
That's all right. I'll get my old knees working. They've got steroid in them again. That helps. A promoter is something that acts with an agent to create an effect. So if you have something that, cancer is the easy one, that causes cancer, and you give a promoter with it, you need a lot less of it to cause the cancer. If you are anxious, if something has caused you anxiety, that can also promote things. But it's not like a prey thing. Anxiety is a promoter of traffic accidents. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but if you're really anxious sitting behind the wheel, you're more likely to have a traffic accident. Yeah.
Similar to enzyme activity.
It could be, an enzyme can be a type of promoter, yes, yes. And there are coenzymes, which are promoters.
You use the term anxiety. Well, a predator could cause anxiety in the fish. The fish becomes fearful and anxious about the predator. So isn't that predator then a promoter? If that fish had been exposed to herbicides, then, and if, say 1,000 fish were exposed to herbicide, a certain number of them dies with a certain amount of herbicide applied, given to them. A certain higher number happens when you show those fish a predator, and it takes much less herbicide to cause that die-off. You follow me?
You would have to do a study to show that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it would be an effect, not necessarily.
There is a study that was pretty much that concept. And the fish did, actually, they were tadpoles. And when exposed to a predator, they died off. I think the chemical was atrazine. They died off at a much faster rate when exposed, when becoming fearful. So, fear is something that weakens a biological organism, right? And it causes, and makes us, or whatever organism, more susceptible. So, I don't know if that falls into that category or not.
Probably technically not a promoter, but I do see where you're going with that.
Jan?
Way back there.
Where are we?
So we've been doing a lot of time up in the high country, and you talked about the chemical application and the ferns, and so, we've overlaid the data, and, there's probably over maybe 1,500 acres that got sprayed this fall. And most of it's right on the drinking watershed of Newport. So what should families be thinking about when they're drawing water out of their tap? Do you think filtration? How do we look at our tap water? How would you recommend families looking at the tap water and the precautions there when we know that there's herbicides in the water?
I have to tell you, I'm not an expert in how to remove the herbicides from water. However, there are good filters that remove a lot of the chemicals from water. Some of them actually advertise that they remove chemicals such as herbicides. So I guess if
But more medically, not the mechanics of it, but what are the things that we should be thinking about as a community? What are the things that we should be looking out for?
There are, as far as birth defects or as far as?
Just general, as you have kids. What are we looking for?
Well, first of all, I would filter my water if I lived here. I get Bull Run water right now, and I test it for particulate matter. And if the particulate matter is under 0.06, I don't filter it. I drink it. But if it's over that, then I start filtering it. But I think you need to filter the water, and you need to start just being aware. What are some of the things that are happening that are out of the ordinary? I was talking earlier, and CH2M Hill did this wonderful study about the water at Schooner Creek under the dump. We have toxic waste dumped above the drinking water in Lincoln City. But CH2M Hill came in, they were commissioned to do a study, and it's one of the few places that archaeologically water will always run uphill. Therefore, it can never contaminate the drinking water coming into Lincoln City. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, this doesn't make any sense to me. And they said, oh yeah, here are the pictures. See, the structure of the land is like this, and the shale one's this way, and the water can't go down into the drinking water, so all this toxic stuff that's up there can't ever get down into the drinking water because the water's always going to have pressure to go uphill. And I said, I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense to me. And one of the things that we have to do is, despite, quote, scientific evidence, we have to use our common sense. There's an emotional intellect. There is an instinct that we inherited from our ancestors that says this is wrong. And we have to listen to that, you know, and be aware. But that's the other thing, is just being aware. You know, I could have delivered those babies and said, oh, you know, oh, that's interesting, you know, I wonder why there's so many NSFL babies. But I wouldn't have gone farther than that. So we have to carefully be aware, observe what's happening. I don't know what else to tell you. It's not an easy answer. It's not an easy answer. And right. Look carefully, as she said, don't believe everything you hear, read, or Google.
I don't need the mic. You reminded me of a quote of a friend of ours who comes and lives in Denver, but he was really active in political, big Pentagon papers actually, and he's very educated and erudite. And the thing he said was just exactly what you said. All of us who aren't really in that world, when we see something that doesn't feel right, it's not right. And that we should trust ourselves for that. And I just want to say thank you for saying that.
Oh, that's, yeah, thank you.
Well, it's okay, thanks. Yeah.
It's better for the recording
Oh,
if you use
okay.
the mic.
It's something akin of when a scientist said, this equation holds this equation holds this, and then some magic happens and this is our result. So scientists can try and pull the wool over our eyes too, intentionally.
I was wondering if there's any correlation with all the chemical use and the increase ADHD or autism. And on the other spectrum, it's like his bees get exposed to chemicals and they can't find their way back to the hive. And it makes me think of dementia. You know, are chemicals causing anything on either spectrum?
Well, I'll start with a quote from a dear friend of mine, and that is, not knowing it would be hard to say with any degree of accuracy. And so, you know, saying that clearly something is causing an increase in autism and people on the spectrum. We don't know what it is. Again, we have all these things in our environment. I can't say more than that. I wish I knew, because autism is getting to be a problem that we don't know how to deal with, and we don't know how to prevent. Part of it is that we're recognizing more people. I live in a continuing care retirement community started by teachers, which makes it affordable. Yeah. And it's lovely. These teachers got together and created this wonderful place. But one of the people on my hall is a little younger than I am. I think he's 76, and he just has a very odd affect and doesn't participate in a lot of things, although he comes and he sits there and occasionally he'll say something. And one of the social workers on our floor said, you know, I'll bet he's on the spectrum. And I thought, no, he doesn't fit with any of the dementias. I'll bet he is on the spectrum, and I wonder what his life was like. And so I asked him a little bit about his life, and we were at dinner one time with our floor. We sort of organized by floors there. And he said, you know, I just did horses. And I thought, you know, I'll bet he is on the spectrum. And so it may have been around a lot longer than we're thinking, but a lot of those people didn't make it because you're at risk if you're on the spectrum. You're at risk for a lot of things. So, okay, I don't know a lot about current herbicide literature. You know, I stopped when that threat to my children came. I stopped. And I've been active in the thing which took my heart early on, which was peace. And that's where my focus has been the last number of years, that and to a certain extent racism, because that has a lot to do with peace. So I guess you've tapped all the knowledge and history that I've got. And thank you very much for the opportunity to come and share with you.
Division of Labor here. Thank you so much, Renee. In the meantime, as we're talking about pesticides, many of you know that we have been really trying to be vigilant about what is happening along the Siletz watershed. It came up in front of the Newport City Council way back in April because of ferns, by the way, Renee, because of this system that we were set up and we were getting these permits come to us. We found out that Hancock Timber Management was about to spray pesticides right over the Newport watershed. I mean, right over the reservoir. So, so this has been in committee. You know, it's kind of been underground through the management. Hancock Timber Management will be at the Newport City Council meeting this Monday. Now, I've been told that there's nothing, they're making a presentation, there will be a discussion about what is going on, at least on that piece of property. There'll be no decisions made. But we would love to see people come. As you know, that there's a comment period at the beginning of the meeting for people to come and to continue to voice their concern that pesticide use over the watershed is not something we want to see in this community. So please join us. The meeting is at the City Hall, obviously, 6 o'clock this Monday.
I would highly encourage you to do that. We had legislation that was going to be an initiative petition on the that was prepared for the ballot on reasonable gun control. And when it went to court for the 5th time, because it was being challenged, we filled the courtroom, and the judge said, I've never seen this much interest in anything that I have done. He said, this is amazing. And so it influenced his judgment significantly. And he allowed us to go ahead with the initiative petition. However, they brought another challenge 3 days later, and we couldn't get it on the ballot. But I highly encourage you to go. Fill the place and ask a few well thought out questions.
So we feel that this has really been a wonderful event. You know, making these connections, having a history. History also creates awareness. You know, a piece of the puzzle has slid into place tonight. So we have decided to give you our first ever Community Rights Warrior Award. MD, for your courage to see and speak the truth, for your perseverance in caring for your community, for protecting the rights of your community to health and safety, and for saying no to harm and yes to peace. Thank you.
Wow, here, let me take a picture of the Thank you all. The papers over there that are on the table, I had tossed, when I moved to the continuing care thing, I tossed all my records. So before they contacted me, I had nothing except a scrapbook that my aunt kept. And so that's what was in the scrapbook. And I also wanted to remind you that change happens. My mother could not vote. My mother, 2 generations of our family. And hey, look how far we've come, babe. I'm sorry, but we forget. There's always back pressure when you move. And we just have to keep moving forward. That's all.
Yeah.